What is happening to your life, Miss Lauren Oak Esperanza Concepcion?
Concepcion. We like to keep things a little crazy in the Oak House, so can never be calm. Things are falling apart slowly but surely.
Well, speaking of never calm, right? This has nothing to do with the podcast today. Do you remember a movie called The Incredible Shrinking Woman?
Yes.
Dude, why has nobody seen that?
It was like 1980 or something like that. It was like late 70s, early 80s. That was an amazing movie. I remember watching it on Channel 11. They would have it all the time playing.
That was so good. Okay, 81.
Okay, I knew it was. Yeah, okay.
And it was with Lily Tomlin.
Yes. She shrunk and then went into the sink, remember?
It was horrible.
Horrible.
It was a horrible movie. Why were we watching this?
8-year-old me was watching it nonstop. No one cared.
No one
I want to watch it now.
I would be traumatized.
I think I need to watch it.
I think I want to watch it too. I was thinking about this the other day because of the whole like Frankie and Grace. And I was trying to come up with like movies that had them both in it that I wanted my daughter to see. So we watched 9 to 5.
Oh, that's
totally
a good one.
Inappropriate.
I love that.
Come on, Lauren. Why were we also watching that at 8?
I know. I was totally watching that when I was,
totally not okay. But we watched that. Great movie, female empowerment.
Yes.
They took charge, really something else with Mr. Hart. And that's going to be the next one. Yes. I have a feeling that in the movie of Incredible Shrinking Woman, which now I'm going to look it up and you're going to see what like that really made you think of that. I have a hunch that the woman there was like a maid or a neighbor or something. And wasn't her name Concepcion?
Maybe something like that.
Yes. I just IMDb'd it. So that's great. That's where my brain went. I love my brain sometimes. But yes, from calling you Concepcion out of nowhere to that. So yeah. Today, our podcast literally has nothing to do with incredible shrinking people.
Shocker. I hope not.
But it's going to be a good one. So, I know that you, as a fancy doula and lactation consultant, and being in this twin universe for way too long, that you know that we have things that are specifically like a concern for us.
Yes.
Right? So like name the biggest one, right? Like what's the big giant one that
staying on a schedule?
No, scratch.
What?
Whiteboard that. Go to medical issues that
being in the NICU.
Have. But what's something that's identical?
Oh, TTTS.
Yes. So there is something called TTTS, which is twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. Yes. And basically what happens is that the vessels that are in your single placenta are not distributed evenly. And so you basically have a donor twinnie and a recipient twinnie. And this is dangerous for everybody involved. Yes. Okay. So now that's definitely one of the most well-known ones.
Yes.
But have you ever heard of something called TAPS?
I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
Okay. So what TAPS is Twin Anemia Polycythemia Sequence. So it's the same concept of an issue, meaning that there is a disproportionate division of placental deliciousness.
Okay.
And this one is just very obviously specific to us. So there is a chick, her name is Stephanie Ernst. We've known each other for a minute and a half. She was the one where I first learned about TAPS. And so her twinnies had it. And I only at the time that I first spoke to her, which I think maybe there's a YouTube video on it. But I remember the first time I spoke to her, I was like, oh my gosh, there is so many things that I didn't even know about. Right. So today, that's what we're talking about. We're basically talking all about TAPS, what it is, how do you get diagnosed with it? And so her website is tapsupport.com. She is based in on the other side of the world versus my New York City, but it doesn't matter where you live. It's the same
Yeah.
situation. And
Yeah.
I really like as a twin parent in general, whether you had identicals or you have fraternals, whether you had two placentas, one placenta, it doesn't matter. I feel like twin families in general should know the
Hmm.
specific issues that kind of, I don't want to say plague us, but for a lack of a better term,
Yeah.
that's what it is because these things could be catastrophic. They're
Well,
not
yeah, our
just like,
pregnancies are
yeah,
totally different.
totally. I mean, that's a lot, man, to put on one placenta and one amniotic
Hmm.
sac to throw two babies in. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I knew that I wanted to make sure that this season we spoke to Steph again. And I just love her. I love her so much. I
Aw.
have so much respect for her, for somebody that's like similar to us, dedicating themselves to the lives of twin families. So, are
Oh,
you ready to hear
I
what
am.
Steph's got to say? All right,
Yes.
guys, without further ado, meet Miss Stephanie Ernst.
Oh my goodness, she's back. Once a live video guest, now officially we're in podcast town. Stephanie, I missed you.
I miss you too, Nad. It's like been forever.
I know. It really has been. And we had that whole pandemic situation. So it feels like an extra forever. But you haven't stopped. You are still going tap strong. What's going on? Well, hold on. Before we find out what's going on with the organization, I know that I've mentioned you guys a few times on our podcast before. And you are kind of like, as I've put it in my mind, like a sister of twin to twin transfusion.
That's right. Yes,
Okay.
It's a sibling disease. So when we talk about monochorionic twins, it's all about that shared placenta. And for ages and ages and ages, everyone thought that everything that went wrong with that placenta was twin to twin transfusion syndrome. But around 17 years ago, some people started going, you know what? Not everything matches up. And so they started investigating. And then so we had, first of all, Rabir and al, and they described this complication that happened after laser surgery for twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, where there was one red baby, one white baby. The red baby had really, really thick blood. The white baby was anemic. And they really, really suggested that we start checking the brain Dopplers because sometimes there was just these little connections in the placenta that weren't sealed properly, and that's what was causing this problem. And then literally 2 days later, a second paper was published by Lopriore et al., and that described the same disease happening spontaneously without laser surgery for no reason at all. And that was when we got Twin Anemia Polycythemia Sequence, or TAPS, as we call it. And then if we move on to the next year, there was a man called Eduard Gratkos, who is a Spanish researcher. I can't for the life of me think, but he described a third complication of monochorionic twins called selective intrauterine growth restriction, but also called selective fetal growth restriction. Depends on which side of the world you're in, what way the world is spinning that day, what they had for breakfast, that kind of thing. So there are 3 separate diseases, and this has been the way for about 16 years now. And it used to be very much an overarching umbrella term to call everything a form of twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. But now we know, because twin-to-twin has its own branch, TAPS has its own branch, SIUGR has its own branch, and now also TRAP has its own branch, because they've all been granted rare disease codes. They're all recognized as individual rare diseases.
Wow.
So that's pretty much what happened. In a nutshell, it used to be all twin to twin. It's not anymore. We're up to date. We're in the modern age. It's now separate diseases.
So this is only about 17 years?
17 years. The Lopriere paper and the Rabia paper came out in 2006. One was March 1st, one was March 3rd, hence International TAPS Day is in March. And then in 2007, Dr. Gratikos actually published his paperwork on selective fetal growth restriction. So really 17 years of separating these diseases happened. So it is common now that we see everyone still bunching it all together, but we need to really change the way we talk and kind of separate them, because they have different diagnostic criteria, different long-term outcomes, all that kind of stuff.
Do you know how about this? When I have a family that has TTTS, right? Yeah. Often I say, did they check for TAPS? Like, did they do additional testing? And they often say no. So even though it's 17 years, which on one hand in medicine is, yesterday. And then on the other side, we're saying like it's 17 years, guys, like get up to date here. If our families are having, they have the single placenta, everybody's there, we're in jeopardy of having these issues. How does a family ask to be tested for this laundry list of issues?
That's a really good thing. And one of the things that we do know is that guidelines don't support routine screening, and it takes a long time to update guidelines. And that's all very well and good. And I know that particularly the US has the ACOG guidelines and also SMFM guidelines. Both of them discuss TAPS and say that it should be discussed with the families, but that's where it ends. There's no knock on to screening. So what I would suggest is for families who are wanting to be tested for TAPS is just saying to their doctors, I've heard things like demand to be tested or push to be tested. Please don't push, please don't demand. It will make your life so much more difficult. Instead, sit your doctor down and have a calm, rational discussion with them. There is evidence, and you can always reach out to me. I will help you provide evidence. I will help you with the evidence and how to use it. But there is a lot of evidence that says, that these diseases should be screened for properly. It's not only twin-to-twin transfusion that we need to worry about, but TAPS, selective fetal growth restriction. You should be getting not only your fluid checks for TTTS, but also MCA Doppler done for TAPS, as well as there are some additional signs of TAPS your family should be aware, your doctors should be aware of. And with selective fetal growth restriction, they need to be measuring the babies every 4 weeks.
Okay.
And checking them, and also checking the way the blood is flowing through the umbilical cord. So they will do a special Doppler for that as well, and noting that. So that's really what you need done.
Okay.
It can be challenging, though, to get these done, but you can always just have that rational and calm conversation with your doctor and say, look, I would like to be screened for these. I am aware of the risks. I am aware of what is going on. And then they can say yes, no. And if they say no and they make you feel silly for asking, or that, find another provider if you can.
Yes.
And if you can't make it, noted in your records that you requested these screenings and it was refused. Yeah. And as you can hear in the background, there was a lovely set of TAPS twins who are extremely happy and healthy.
That's the best sound background noise that you could ever possibly have, because it's such a scary thing that happens when you first of all, when you know that you are having a higher risk twin pregnancy. That's your first stressor. Yeah. And then if you do find out that there's complications along the road, sometimes you feel a little hopeless, to be honest.
That's it. And when you walk into that first appointment, you find out that you're having identical twins. It is a terrifying experience because they will smash you with everything that goes wrong. And, quite often the first thing we hear and the last thing we hear are the negative things, and we don't take away the positive things. So that's why I'm always kind of like, I always say to people, look, walk away, process everything. You are going to take away the most negative thing you heard today, and that's going to be the thing that sticks in your head. Yep. And I can even tell you now, I still remember the conversation I had about selective reduction, word for word, and when we were diagnosed with TAPS. And, and it stuck in my brain. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that this is part of how we as human process things. Yeah. We will always hear the worst case scenario, and that is what we will take away.
It's absolutely disgusting. The first doctor that I went to, I never went back to him. I remember leaving the office that day with totally hopeless, thinking that I was never going to make it to term, that everything was going to be wrong. I don't know why some doctors are like that. I understand that they have to kind of tell you things that could happen, but holy crap, man, could we?
It's about delivery.
Yes.
It's really about how you deliver it. And, and in the same way, that's why I always tell people, don't go in and be the aggressor. Don't demand things. Have a conversation. Keep it calm, keep it rational, and make sure that you are walking away with an understanding. And, don't be demanding, because that's going to label you, and then you will have more problems along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Now, do you find here, this is going to be a positive one. Do you find that some countries are much more responsive to testing than others, or is it still universal? Everybody's keeping their head in the sand.
Oh, I published a paper on this. So yes, some countries are higher, do have embraced screening for monochronic twins. And we find it's more within Europe. Going to hate on the US just for a little bit.
You're fine with that. We don't do tests. It's our medical whole system really fights back on a lot of things. So in the US, we're going to have to advocate a little bit harder.
That's exactly right. Within Europe, though, we see that more and more countries are picking up on routine MCA Doppler screening, are more aware of the signs of TAPS on ultrasound, and are embracing more of the research that is coming out. And what we see is that, wow.
Even they're having a good day.
What we see is that this is happening more and more. And there is a slow uptake in the UK, but again, we see like there's a lot of differences in regional areas compared to metropolitan areas. But within the US, we see outside of a lot of the more regional, bigger centers, so your Eastern Coast and the Midwest and things like that, we do not see much screening going on. And a lot of doctors are still calling everything twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome.
Yeah.
They're hesitant to refer to tertiary centers, so the bigger hospitals, for screening. They're hesitant to refer to maternal fetal medicine specialists. This is what we see. And I don't know the reason for it. I can speculate for hours and hours and hours. What I do see, though, is that the paper, that the research that they're basing the guidelines on is very old, and whether it is a lack of education, a lack of willingness to progress, or whether it's just a generalized apathy. But I don't see why. Like, I mean, we know that doctors are out there and they're wanting to make a change and they're wanting to do the best by their patients. And I think this is a really big thing, is that I don't know the reason. I have tried contacting the SMFM. I've tried speaking with ACOG, but I mean, I'm just another mummy group, so to speak. And it's challenging.
Yeah.
And
welcome to the club. We get the same. We get the same thing when it comes to twins and sleep and the regulations that are over here with our American Academy of Pediatrics. Now, what about Australia and Asia and Africa? What's happening as far as TAPs go over there?
That's really interesting, because within Africa, we don't actually know. And because there is such a high variance in like the centers, because, you've got Northern Africa with the Middle East, and they're quite on the ball and everything like that. We know in South Africa and that sort of area, there is also a push towards more screening. But again, it comes down to resources and training in that area. Within the middle, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
We do speak sometimes with Central African countries, but again, it's one of those things where they're fighting for basic screening. So additional screening is even a much bigger pipe dream. Australia is on board. Happy to say my homeland is pretty good. They have embraced TAP screening and they're quite aware of it. And again, I think it's another situation like the US, is that regional centers and need to talk to metropolitan centers. New Zealand.
But even here, stuff like, honestly, in New York, nobody's getting tested. It's not happening. And you would think that, if you could make it there, you could make it anywhere, right? But I have plenty of my mama bears here that I just genuinely say, like, hey, just ask. Worst thing that you could do is not ask. So just there's no reason to not say, hey, I heard about this. What do you think?
I guess it also comes down to, as culturally, as we are all sort of seeing doctors being up on this high pedestal, and it is really difficult to challenge a doctor's opinion. Let me tell you, it is not difficult, but the approach is difficult, and that is, I'm now quite used to throwing my phone and my paperwork down on the table, sitting back, crossing my arms and going, no, I don't accept that answer, try again. But that comes from lots and lots of training and lots of confidence and being able to do that. And I know that going back 9 years ago when my girls were born, I wouldn't have had the guts to do that. I accepted everything.
Yeah. But Steph, that, like, honestly, that I'm not going to say like honk, honk, let's toot our own horns, but we're in the position where we get the opportunity to empower parents. Yes. And we give them the questions to ask. And we say, you can do this. Like when we had our kiddos, and your kiddos are much younger than my kiddos. So throwback, I had my kiddos before TAPS was known about, right? So, but I think about how I didn't do it. And I don't even know if it's time. I think that it's just that there's so many questions that go with the twin pregnancy. And then when you know that there's a higher risk, there's the fear that makes you voiceless.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And it can be so daunting, and you get thrown into this new world of words that you didn't even think you would need to know in your lifetime. Like the word monochorionic rolls off my lips. I've been saying it all my life, but the reality is that it's a word I learned only 9 years ago. And to be honest, I wasn't confident enough to use it up until about 4 years ago. And
you're a brave soul. It will come out in a very jumbled mess. Yes. Thank God for Momo is what I could just stick with and feel safe there. Yes. Feel safe there. That's my safe space.
Yeah, safe space.
That's where I go.
But that's exactly it. But even then, like the words mo-di, mo-mo, di-di, these are words that we never expected to
be used. And it's one of the most popular articles at Twiniversity when we just talk about the types of twins.
Yeah.
And people share it like crazy because people like who aren't in the twin world forget about as deep as we are, right? They didn't even know. They had no idea. They have no idea that there's different types of twins. There's different types of pregnancies. There's higher risk, lower risk. And not that anything's really lower risk. They don't know that we tend to deliver earlier and why we tend to deliver earlier.
60% of twins are born prematurely. 60%.
Yeah. I think that's low, to be honest. I feel like it's probably a little higher.
They counted at 37 weeks as full term. So, there's probably a higher amount, but, 60% of twins will go through a NICU unit. 60% of twins are born before 37 weeks. That is a phenomenal number. And, regardless of how they come in, whether it's induction or delivery or, for emergency C-section or anything like that, that is a really high number. And we speak a language as multiple parents. We speak a language that a lot of people don't understand. I mean, triplet parents, higher order multiple parents, my hat is off to you guys because you speak languages that I don't even understand.
Yeah. Like, me and Steph, we stay in our twin lane. You right?
Yeah.
That's too much for me. I can't go there, Steph. It overwhelms me. It does. But I love that we could help people understand that they can advocate for themselves and they can ask the questions, and that it's not, uncommon to have a NICU experience. And it's not, where like when I had mine, I never knew another baby that was in the NICU or an adult that was in the NICU. And now when you are kind of in the twin world, you're like, oh yeah. Like, even if sometimes they go for an hour. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. I thought like pre having my own twins, that if you went to the NICU, that it was like an ICU situation and like you were in there for dire, significance. But it could be just like, hey, we're going to do a quick drive by the NICU, do a quick checkout. And the other thing that I found is that people a few years ago, there was this whole documentary about, the higher rate of C-section and that, how horrible it is and everything. And then that got kind of put into Mama Bear's brains that, oh, I can't do this. But then when you had twins and they're like, listen, we need to get these kids out at a certain time. They're like, oh, my doctor's got to make a tea time or whatever. They don't realize that because our bodies typically, and I get hate about this, right? If you have one baby, let's pretend we're in an elevator. Okay. Yeah. If you're in an elevator by yourself, you can do whatever you want. You're not going to bother anybody else. But if you're in the elevator with somebody else and you want to stretch your arms out, you could punch somebody in the face, and you start running out of room because that elevator gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then your umbilical cord, which is basically your vending machine, could get trapped up against, your other twin. I mean, there's so many things that could happen. And so when people are like, oh no, I want to go, to 40 weeks. And I'm like, listen, you gotta trust medicine a little bit. I'm not saying that you got to go all in. You could ask questions, but TAPS is one of those things that I want people to get into the conversation, and I don't want them to be afraid to talk about it.
And that's exactly it. And, a lot of people also say to me, because I talk about this and I'm quite open about both my experience and both the outcomes that we've had. And I'm also open about the long-term outcomes for TAPS twins. And, there is some pretty scary stuff. You've got 44% of donor twins can have some form of neurodevelopmental impairment.
Let's talk about donor twins for a second, because you just used a word that are people where we know, right? We should have like a dictionary, because now I'm like, oh crap, I should stop her every time she says something that maybe they don't know. Let's talk about donor and recipient twins and what exactly that is and why it's a thing.
Yeah. So within both twin-to-twin transfusion and TAPS, there is something called a donor twin and a recipient twin. And it's all about blood flow. Now, with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, it is a really rapid shift of blood from one twin to the other twin. And so you have one twin who is donating all their blood really quickly to their sibling who is receiving it. So you have a donor twin and a recipient twin. And the recipient twin creates more and more urine, which makes more amniotic fluid, and that's what causes the fluid imbalances. Very, very quick synopsis of that. So with TAPS, you also have a donor and a recipient twin, but with TAPS donors, it's a very slow transfer of blood. So you've only got like little tiny connections in the placenta. TTTS ones are quite large. TAPS ones are very, very, very small. Dental floss, that kind of thing. And they're slowly donating their blood to their siblings. So over time, and that's why we sort of say TAPS is a very different beast to TTTS. TTTS, it happens quickly. You've got to act quickly. TAPS, it happens slowly. So there's not as much need in early stages, and I will say in early stages, to move as quickly as you do with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. So a donor twin is the twin who is giving things to their other twin. And that also happens in a way in TRAP sequence, which is the other kind of lesser known friend of the family, shall we say. You have a pump twin and you have an acardiac twin. The pump twin is doing all the work for the other twin. So it kind of is the donor situation as well. But in TRAP sequence, of course, unfortunately, the acardiac twin doesn't survive. So it is one of those things. But yeah, there is a donor and there is a recipient. The recipient twin is the one who is getting everything, getting the blood, and the donor twin is giving it to them. And I really want to clarify too is that a language change that we should also embrace is that when we're talking about donors and recipients, there is no such thing as one baby is stealing blood from the other or is stealing all the nutrients from the other. You cannot blame the babies. It is always the fault of the placenta, and we cannot change the way our placentas are wired.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, no. And, I know there's myths about drinking protein shakes. I know there's myths about you can do certain diets, you can do this. None of those things are scientifically proven.
Yeah. So at this time, the treatment for TTTS would be the placental ablation surgery, right? Which is not done at every hospital, but there are centers in most parts of the world.
Yes, there is quite a few centers across the world who do laser ablation surgery, and there will be two forms of laser surgery done. There will either be selective laser ablation, which is where they go along and they just do all the connections on the placenta. They do not, that's all they do. There is the Solomon technique, which is where they do the connections on the placenta, but then they draw a line between those connections. And it basically, we all know the biblical story of King Solomon. This is pretty much how it is. One of the reasons why it's called that. But they draw a line along the placenta, effectively splitting it into two placentas. So it will still be one placenta, but they have done all the connections are disconnected, hopefully. And they function now as two separate sides of the placenta.
And what could we do, if anything, for the other sisters of TTTS? Like, what do we do for TAPS? Do we just do early delivery? Is there...
Yeah,
so
good question. There is 5 established treatments for TAPS. And the next thing that's going to come out of my mouth is going to sound scary. And that is, we don't know what the best treatment for TAPS is. However, there are 5 standard treatments, and I will say the first one because we'll just tuck it away, because there is selective reduction, and that is usually done when one twin is so sick that their chances of survival out of the uterus are very minimal. It is a last resort. Every doctor will tell you that it is a last resort. Every doctor should treat it as a last resort. We'll just tuck that one away, though, because it is a distressing topic. And as much as I do think we should actively talk about it, it is a treatment for TAPS, but it is an accepted treatment. But we do have other options before we get to that stage. There is, of course, laser surgery using the Solomon technique, which I just described. There is intrauterine blood transfers. Now, again, it's kind of tricky with that one because they buy time. That's all they do, because you're not fixing the root of the problem, which is those tiny connections on the placenta. They will give the donor twin a little bit of a kickstart and boost their blood supply, but ultimately that blood is going to go through the placenta to their co-twins. So usually done later in the pregnancy. You have expectant management, which is a watch and wait scenario. And a lot of people come and they're really, really worried because their doctors are choosing expectant management as a treatment option. And I always try to remind them that it is a valid treatment because TAPS moves so slowly. So if they're checking them every 48 hours, 72 hours, they're going to see the progression and they can make an action plan from there. And so it's not as dire as with TTTS because it's moving so slowly. And the final treatment option, of course, is early delivery. If the babies are viable and so post 24 weeks, I know there's controversy about that, but generally accepted 24 weeks, I'm going to speak in a very general term. Post 24 weeks, if they feel the babies can do better on the outside than on the inside, they will deliver them early.
Yeah. We actually have a lot of early delivery podcasts this season. Yeah. So I don't know when we're going to come out, you and I. So I don't know, if they could have already happened, but I know for this year, I can't believe the amount of early deliveries we had. And I always wonder, are there more early deliveries or are more people just willing to share their story? For us, because we're not like a scientific organization, I can't actually tell.
Well, there's two facts I can think of here. First one is that the average gestation for TAPS twins is 32 weeks. So that gives you an idea of when we're talking about TAPS twins. Yeah. They are almost always born early. But I think the other is you hit a really important point there, and that is a lot of people are willing to share their stories because there is a feeling among the twin community is that, not everything has a negative outcome. We hear so much negativity. And we hear a lot of, bad stories, and everyone is willing to share their early stories to give hope to others. And I think that's a really beautiful thing about the multiple birth community in itself is that everyone is so willing to lift each other up and give those stories of hope. There is only one concern I have about that is that we should never, ever, ever suppress the stories that are the ones that don't have that happy outcome. And that's why I'm always very open and honest about selective reduction and with TAPS twins, donor twins are at risk of, with post-laser TAPS in particular, they are very, very much fragile and there is a very high chance that they can die. But if we intervene and we do the right treatments, there is a much better story and I think much better outcome. And I think that's a really important thing to talk about as well as those happy outcomes.
Absolutely.
We should never repress the bad ones.
Yes. And we have articles on not so happy deliveries and they For us at Twiniversity and for anybody who's out there listening, if you have a story to tell, we want to listen because the whole world was made for singletons. Let's just be honest, right? Like everything was. And don't tell me seesaws. Like that's not a thing. Like don't give me that. And they don't even have them in playgrounds anymore. No. So I remember everyone saying, "Oh, but there's plenty of things." Like, no, just be quiet. No. So the whole world was made for them, and this is our little community, right? And Twiniversity isn't a website. Like, yes, of course, we're a website. Yes, we're a global website, but we want to make sure our goal every day when I get up and the rest of the Twiniversity team get up, we literally say, how can we make your life better? How can we make your life easier? What are the things that we could help you so that you get a little bit more sleep, that you feel a little bit more comfort, that you feel a little bit more relaxed because you're prepared in whatever way? And that is what you're doing, is you're going out there. Like, Steph, you're doing it, man. You're like out there and you have your foundation. You haven't stopped. I have to say, you're like one of the hardest working people in this industry, and it's your passion of education and knowledge that's driving you. But how are you doing all this and still have your puppies? And like, I don't know, Steph, like, honestly, like, I have to say, I see your stuff on LinkedIn too, which I think is great because then you're always top of mind anyway. And I love that you actually listen to the podcast. So you know that you literally are always top of mind to me. But how do you do all of this? Like, how are you managing? And when you talk about TAPS, is it like triggering for you? And does it bring you back to the dark times where they were talking about selective reduction and you didn't know? Like, how does this whole experience of being a part of TAPS and being a TAPS family and doing all of this, how does it affect you, Stephanie, not you, Stephanie, the big cheese, doing 1,000 things?
That's a really good question. I think, like, in relation to how I do it all, time management, I have excellent time management. I have color-coded calendars, and I set myself times, and I actually have set times on the weekend where I don't touch my phone. I don't touch anything, digital detox, literally. With my work as well, I tend to be online a lot. So for me, stepping back on the weekends is a really important aspect of what I do. In relation to the work that I do, and like from a personal perspective, yes, can be very triggering. And there will be times where something will be just completely overwhelming, or I will read something and I will be like, that is the biggest load of what I have ever heard, or that is so distressing. And there are moments where I have to take those moments and I have to say, okay, this is affecting me as a human. Let me think about why it's triggering me. What is this doing? And that's really how I do it, is like I step back, and you kind of like, you have to put yourself first always. And that's a really big thing. You always have to do that. And no matter what, my family comes first, my kids come first. The fighting, because I also have my own battles with getting the girls their getting diagnoses and that kind of thing, which is really what I try. They are my core focus. But then, when I look at this is also my way of healing myself, because my TAPS diagnosis came at a time where I was in a foreign country. I had been learning the language for a year. And so I did not speak very much Dutch. I did not, I couldn't get all the medical terms. I was feeling very isolated. I knew no one with twins in this country. So there was a lot going on in my head, and it kind of all imploded. And after after NICU and everything, I became so withdrawn. And I realized with us also, because I'm pretty sure that most of your listeners will also know that the basis of my foundation is my girls are the red and white twins that you'll see online everywhere. I found within myself was that they have a very important story to tell, because everyone sees this pair of red and white twins and they don't have a name. They just see these two sick babies. And that became my thing, is that they have a story to tell. And it's not always a pretty story. There is a lot of fighting. And in the last 3 years, we've kind of had a really big battle to get hearing testing, to get developmental checks done for them. Because everything on their paperwork was listed as twin to twin transfusion syndrome and not as TAPS. And if you have these two kids who are like visually significant, and their story is getting told, people are going to go, oh gosh, you know, there is a connection. So as I said, I can talk for hours, but my connection has always been that my story is just as important as anyone else's, but I'm going to tell my story in the hope that it gets people telling theirs.
Oh,
and it's really, I think it's honestly, really worked.
Steph, I really do. And, you know, I know that for both of us, we're living proof that you don't necessarily, what do I want to say? You don't necessarily recover from things, but you heal.
Yeah.
Is that like two different things? Because I know in your situation, I mean, like Steph, honestly, like you went through like so much. And instead of just saying, okay, I accept that this is my reality, I'm going to go back to regular business and we're just going to pretend that nothing happened. And you literally changed your whole trajectory of your life. And you're like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be on a soapbox. Everybody needs to know that this is something that exists. But at the same time, you're saying at one side of your mouth that you're literally saying you have to take care of yourself. But on the other side of your mouth, you're like, no, I'm going to remind myself of this trauma every single time and tell everybody about it. So it's a very selfless thing that you do too, for the sake of the twin community at large.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that people get sick of hearing my voice, and that's fine. I'm sick of
Who says that?
Too. I think
except your kids.
I honestly sit there, I'm like, oh my God, I'm telling my story yet again. Next week, I'm going to give an hour lecture in our local hospital, and being a foreigner and a parent of twins in a Dutch NICU. You know, and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to be telling my story again. They're going to be so sick of me. But like, I really honestly think that it's also that repetition factor. You know, if you hear something enough times, it can make a difference. It'll stick in your head. And that's honestly what I think, is that if I'm annoying enough, people are going to remember me.
You're the opposite of annoying to me. I find you very, very, very inspiring. I really do. And there's not a lot of people in this. I don't even know what industry we're in. Like, I don't know if Twiniversity is a nonprofit. I don't know if it's just literally, it's our little twin world, right? Yeah. And there are so few of us that literally dedicate ourselves to it full time. There's not a lot of people out there. And I love being in even a virtual room with somebody that speaks my language.
Yeah.
Regardless of what language we're actually speaking.
Oh, I nerd out. Like, it's like, for me, it's just a big nerd out. So, yeah, like I literally call myself, my business cards actually have TAPS nerd on them. So, but, you know, for me, it's kind of like a case of, if enough people share their stories and enough people raise their voices, then we can actively make a change. And you know, within the world of twins, everyone sees twins and like, oh my God, cute babies in matching clothes. Oh, how adorable. And they see they have these rose-colored glasses on. And when you talk to a twin parent, you know, there are some who will say, yes, I'd have twins again in a heartbeat. But I can tell you now, the majority of twin parents who have just gone, no, I wouldn't. If I had my way, I would never choose twins again or multiples again. And that's the kind of honesty that we like to see in our area. And so many people are like, oh, what a blessing, you know, double the love and all that kind of stuff. And yes, it is, but it's also double the stress, double the
and double the college tuitions. Cheers is what I say to that. So Steph, if we want to learn more, are we just going to tapsupport.com?
Yeah, you can go to tapsupport.com.
Are there other national like resources that people should know about, or we make you our home base and then you have
well, we are just one group of people who are talking about TAPS. You also have organizations like my good friends at the Fetal Health Foundation, who are an excellent resource for not only TAPS but twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, selective fetal growth restriction, your local multiples group. So your local multiples group, there will always be another parent there who has walked a similar journey. I'm not going to say the same journey, a similar journey.
Yes.
There is always going to be that kind of support, but you can also find like resources everywhere. NORD, the National Organization for Rare Diseases, has a webpage on TAPS. I know I wrote it along with my good friend, Professor Lopriore. Now, there are many places you can find information about TAPS. Many of the big hospitals now also have pages. I know, for example, CHOP have one. It's an excellent page, actually.
Johns Hopkins.
Hopkins has one.
I was shocked when I saw that.
Hopkins has one fault, and that is they call it a form of twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, which we have already covered. It is not. However, they have a page on it, so semantics. Basically all your big hospitals will have a page on it. Anyone who offers fetal surgery will have a page. You can always come to me, but I'm not the only expert out there. Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing to say is that, when it comes to things, we always have specializations, but we are not the only experts.
But you're our friend, though.
Yeah, I'm your friend.
So that's the thing. And you're a Twiniversity friend. You're not just like my friend. Like I really, you're one of the people that I will say, like God's honest truth. I really know that if I were to call you at 2:00 in the morning, your time, my time, it doesn't matter. And I'd be like, Steph, I'm worried about this family. I know you would help me. And that is a very, very, very rare thing to find.
You've done that. I know I've received emails.
Was it the middle of the night for you? I have to keep remembering the time zones. So yes,
I've gotten emails from you guys, but that's the whole thing is that it is really cooperation. And I think that's a really big thing we need to talk about as well is that no one is one expert. You always need to collaborate, cooperate. And that goes for fetal therapy centers as well. Collaborate, cooperate. Let's get more data. Let's make changes together as a community. You cannot stand alone and have all this, all these years of experience. You must collaborate and cooperate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always say at Twiniversity, I was like, listen, I'm not going to say I know everything, but I definitely know who does.
Yeah.
So for me, it is about being the hub and to say, okay, because like Steph, like you're definitely one of the people I would count on one hand that I know for this particular situation, like we could count on you and that I love that. And I don't know if you know how rare that is and how special you are and how amazing and like generous. And I know that we have like a mutual love and admiration, but I mean it, Steph, like I can't believe the things that you do. And you make me so proud to be a part of this community and just to watch how you have grown your support organization in the years since we've even known each other is just it's just unbelievable. You're unbelievable.
It goes both ways, though, because I really admire what you've built. And the fact that we have these resources is amazing and that we can share and collaborate.
All right. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go to TAP support. We're going to find you, or they could email us at community@twiniversity.com.
Perfect.
And we could connect you as always. But I just honestly, like, Steph, thank you for everything that you do. And I'm so proud that you keep doing it because I do know that there's a piece of your heart that hurts a little bit every time. I have the same thing with my whole situation. And I keep trying to remind myself that it's a do-over for me, right? So like Twiniversity is a whole do-over. In any part of your life, for anything that happens, you always get to choose two routes, right? You could either, more than two routes. You could pretend it didn't happen. Right? That's one. You could actively heal from it and just keep it to yourself, or you could use your experience to help others. And that is exactly what you do. And I love you so much, Steph. And I can't wait to stalk you so much more, which is great. So tapsupport.com is where we're going to go to find Steph, or you could always email us too. And Steph, thank you so much for being such a good friend of Twiniversity.
That's okay. And thank you guys for giving me a platform, because it's like I said, when you're starting out with anything and, you're going up and you're kind of putting yourself out there on the stage, it's really quite challenging. And, to have someone like Twiniversity and yourself who come behind us and go, yes, we support you. It's a really great feeling because it validates everything that you do.
Oh, yeah,
And
totally. Super. I will validation. I'll put it on you like a spell. Like, just keep doing that. You keep doing what you're going to do, because then it makes my life so much easier, knowing that I could hand off families that are in a higher risk, that I know you're going to take care of them.
Yeah.
You know, and it's different than your doctor. And I'm not saying that we're not going to get doctors involved, but there's just something it's personal, and it's a connection that you need. And it's that inspiration. And then hearing Steph's voice and learning her story and knowing that her kids are okay. And yes, there's going to be steps that have to be done after this, but here's what may happen. And here's what you could do perhaps now to get a jump on it.
And that's exactly it. It's about freedom of information, being able to talk about it freely, having not all the answers, but having an overview, and an up-to-date overview as well. Like, not having the latest information. And I'm very, very blessed in that my foundation is supported by some of the most amazing twin research doctors there are. So in that way, I'm very, very, very blessed and very grateful. And, quick shout out. Thank you, Enrico, Femke, Joanne, Lasana, and Janine for the support you give me, as well as the hundreds of other doctors who come and talk to us regularly. It's an amazing feeling. But one of the, that's the whole thing, is that, again, it comes down to that spirit of collaboration and cooperation. If we share stories, we talk about it openly, and, we don't put things behind a wall, or, we don't paint ourselves as the only experts. We talk, we cooperate, we collaborate, and, we have open discussions. We can make so much change.
Absolutely. And we will.
Yes.
And it's just as easy as that. We will.
Absolutely.
The end. Well, I love you, Steph. Thank you so much for playing with us today.
That's okay, Nat. Anytime. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Ooh, me too. All right, guys. So if you need anything from me or Stephanie, email us at community@twiniversity.com or go to tapsupport.com. There is going to be links in the show notes. Feel free, if you're like, hey, instead of buying this cup of coffee today, I'm going to take my $2, $1, $5 and do it to something great with it. Definitely throw it Steph's way, because she is definitely changing our twin life world, one TAPS family at a time. Until next time, guys, see you later, alligators.